have with us on the phone doing, I believe, his first radio interview, Christopher Sapienza, who is not only the police commissioner, but is a graduate of a number of graduate programs, cementing his standing in the police community. Commissioner, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Commissioner, to start off with, tell us the state of the police department in Yonkers, in your estimation, currently.
So, as you know, Yonkers has now graduated to be the third largest city in New York State, and we've had a great success with keeping crime down despite our size, and with limited resources. And we have just a long police history here, and our officers are very tight-knit and professional, and we're very proud of the department and the job that we're doing.
Okay, now you talk about financial issues. What would those financial issues be?
So in today's climate, of course, everything is do more with less, and we have to provide services in a way that's still consistent with our budget. Make sure we don't overburden taxpayers, but at the same time, we want to give people good quality service. We've had a lot of challenges recently. Most recently, COVID, which was a severe financial strain on us, and now we have new challenges such as recent legislation. Some of the challenges such as raise the age, all these new legislative...
Wait. Raise the age of what?
So when we talk about raise the age, we're talking about raising the age before you're actually considered a criminal, before you actually enter the criminal justice system.
Right.
So what happens is when you commit what are still very serious crimes, the law does not give us the same tools to make these arrests, and instead we have to make alternate provisions to deal with these type of crimes.
All right, and how are you doing that with a limited budget? Do you have a youth bureau? I mean, what do you have to combat this with?
So we have numerous initiatives. We have youth court, we have drug court, we also have to make separate accommodations so that they're not that these youths aren't commingled with criminals that are of age. And we have to, deal with all these extra burdens. We had to make our facilities accommodate such, these arrests, and we had to segregate, some of the younger actors from the older actors. So these are all, physical changes to our facilities and stuff that we had to do.
And that means also increased budget, because if you're segregating prisoners, you have to create a way to separate them. You have to have a separate part of the gym, of the jail, that costs money
and more people.
Absolutely.
More people.
We had to build out facilities, and by building out the facilities, we required more money, and thankfully, both the mayor and the city council were very supportive in giving us the funding that we need.
Commissioner, we're going to have to cut it now because we're going to our first break, which is a Fox News and Business News break. We have Police Commissioner Christopher Sapienza on with us for our hour. We'll see you on the other side.
1460 WVOX.
Now back to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, Ardina Seward, and Charles Stern on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio, and this is Charlie Stern. This is WVOX 1460 AM, and you can get it at WVOX.com. And Peter, I said, I like to point it out.
Yes.
If you go to your Alexa and you say, play WVOX, Alexa, play WVOX, it works.
And you don't have to say please.
You don't have to say please.
You just order Alexa to do it.
Thank you. You just say, Alexa, WVOX.
Okay, let's get back to Commissioner Sapienza.
So Commissioner, I'm delighted that you're here today, and I want to ask you a question, and then I'm going to kind of hand off to my colleague, Ardina.
In our Yonkers Bureau.
In our Yonkers Department.
The YO Bureau, yeah.
My question is, you have a tremendous border with New York City. There's an awful lot of news about crime in New York City, 400-odd murders, it's a bad scene every time you turn on the TV. You're hearing about it. So how does that inform your job?
So the way it affects us, well, first and foremost, what I was saying earlier about raise the age, what makes things different here is that we have the support of the mayor and the city council, first and foremost. So we have, our leadership is behind us when we get these things done. And that's why you don't see the same surge in crime in Yonkers as you do see in, New York City and the various boroughs like the Bronx. But what we do have is we do see crimes spilling into Yonkers. So we have a lot of people come into Yonkers with the intent on committing these crimes. So these outsiders come here and they think it's pretty much the same setup as New York City, that they're going to come in and they're going to steal catalytic converters, commit robberies, steal cars, anything from quality of life crimes to serious crimes. And then, what we often see is they flee back to New York City or another jurisdiction. So that's always a challenge.
I'm sorry. I need to double click on, I don't understand the linkage between raise the age and the delta between Yonkers crime and New York City crime. Got to explain that again.
Okay. So we basically, right now, we have the trifecta of things that affect how we do business right now based on legislation. And it's raise the age, which, of course, now the law considers you have to be older to be considered a criminal in the eyes of New York State. And then also we have discovery laws, which you're entitled to the various materials that must be gathered. And in many cases, your case can be dismissed if we don't gather all these materials, which takes time and money. And we also have bail reform, which means in a lot of cases there's no cash bail anymore, or we're basically cutting people loose for pretty serious crimes that normally we would keep them overnight or keep them until arraignment. So you have all these various, legislative items now that affect how we do business.
Okay, raise the age, discovery laws, bail reform, that's the trifecta.
Yes.
And those things are more liberalized in New York City than they are in Yonkers. Is that correct?
Well, these things exist in New York City as well, but now, unfortunately, this legislation and an after effect of it is that it's created a certain permissiveness, and what happens is and a lawlessness, and what happens is people traveling to Yonkers now fear, there's no fear of any kind of prosecution. There's no fear of any kind of consequence.
Let me ask you a question. I understand where you're going. And Ardina, after the half hour, it's yours.
Okay.
But what is your relationship with, like, the 5-2 precinct or the 5-0 precinct? I mean, you share a border with them, and I know the crime in that neighborhood. The Kingsbridge section is where the station house is, but it goes up to the Yonkers line. I was the Bronx reporter for the New York Post for a good long time. What is your relationship with them? Isn't there something you guys can do on the border there?
Well, there are things that we do with our partners, and certainly those local precincts are our partners as well, and we coordinate with them. So we don't have dangerous pursuits and stuff like that. We coordinate with them regularly. So, hey, we may have information based on our newer technologies like license plate reading cameras and whatnot, and then we contact those local precincts, and they coordinate. Hey, we may have a vehicle stop that you were looking for the other day for a crime in Yonkers, and vice versa. And we have that communication and we have that dialogue.
But do you have a task force joined at the hip with the NYPD?
Yes. Well, actually, we have numerous task force. So we have a lot of different partners. We have the DEA task force. We have Safe Street task force. We have a partnership with the Marshals. We have a partnership with ATF. And we have a partnership with DEA even. So all these different partnerships, we have officers from different jurisdictions with the same goal. It could be drugs, it could be guns, it could be gang activity.
Okay, Charles?
So I'm curious, you're a political appointee. Your job is to understand the political layer of policing and governing. Where are your local officials? Like, where's Jamal Bowman in this calculus?
Well, listen, I can't imagine that anybody is a proponent of crime. Jamal Bowman, I've only met him briefly. It sounds like we're very much on the same page as far as, fighting crime, for protecting the community, for standing up for the community. Specifically in Yonkers, my partnership is with the mayor, with the city council, with the Westchester County District Attorney, and with our local leadership, and the other senators and everyone that affects us here locally.
So I'm going to want to know more about why there's lower crime numbers in Yonkers versus New York City. These issues that you're raising, raise the age, the discovery laws, the state of
Works in both locales.
Those aren't those state initiatives? Like, so why is it different?
They're state initiatives, but we have a good working relationship with the Westchester County District Attorney, and we have a good local relationship with our public officials. And even though those are state guidelines and laws, there are certain things we could do. When we see a recidivist offender, maybe the person who's committed the same crime numerous times, maybe we can make a phone call and say, hey, listen, we need to focus on this person and at least prosecute to the fullest extent possible. There's always a continuum, and the more serious the crime, the more serious the problem, we could just make sure we use the most we have available to us. Donald Rumsfeld once said, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And so we're not making excuses. We do the best job we can.
Understood. So
I haven't heard a Rumsfeld quote in a long time.
I know. I just remembered that quote, and it seemed appropriate. I know it's a stretch, that one.
So one quick fun fact here. I looked up your name on Google, and apparently there's an actor who was portrayed somebody on Law and Order with your name.
I was in contact with him on Facebook, actually.
Okay.
There's also an actor named Al Sapienza.
So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that and some serious subjects as well. And we're going to hear from Ardina. All right? Thanks, everybody. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Come back. The break is going to be brief.
1460 WVOX.
Now back to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, Ardina Seward, and Charles Stern on 1460 WVOX.
Indeed, this is Westchester Eye on the radio. This is Charlie Stern. We're back. Our guest is Yonkers Police Commissioner Christopher Sapienza. A quick shout out to Alex, our engineer, and this whole team of people back here backing us up. There's several of them. And thank you. You do a great job every single week. Ardina, you actually live in Yonkers.
And have lots of questions for the new police commissioner.
And then that is why it is appropriate for me to respectfully turn over this time to you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm a longtime resident of the YO, as it's affectionately known. And, Commissioner, I'd like to echo Charles's sentiments about how delighted we are to have you on the show, this being, I believe, your second radio interview. So, we're lucky. I want to start out with a statistic which I believe is approximate, but in the city of Yonkers, the ratio of citizen to police is roughly 33-1, which is under the New York City ratio. That being said, you talked in the earlier part of the show about the trifecta. Now, in the best case scenario, how many more police personnel do you need to operate Yonkers at an optimum level, roughly?
So that's always a difficult question. I mean, there's my optimum level. There's a realistic optimum level. More is obviously better.
But why don't you deal with all three of those scenarios?
Okay. Well, it's not just the number of officers, it's what we're doing with those officers. And,
right.
I mean, in a perfect world, what I would like to see is school resource officers again. But again, they have to be manned in a way where you could do it for every school, and you have to be able to man it with enough officers so that they could be there every day when the students are there. So something like that is a big ticket item, and it's more than just a mere number. That's a whole other aspect of staffing. Recently, we added 10 new police officers to the budget that was approved by the mayor and the city council, and for us that's a significant bump, and we're going to put those officers to work right away. And what we like to do regarding staffing is not necessarily just hire more officers and then you're paying for more officers all the time and burdening the taxpayers. What we like to do is use them as efficiently as possible. And recently we've been making use of the neighborhood stabilization team. And what that does, it allows us to have anywhere from 8 to 10 officers that we can move from place to place to place. If there's a recent spike in crime, an uptick in crime, we could put those officers there. If we have issues with quality of life, we could just put a whole bunch of officers in that area to help ameliorate the problem. So this kind of flexibility helps us out a lot. Clearly we don't need the same amount of officers on a foot post in January as we might need in June or July.
Right.
So that gives us this flexibility to get basically the most efficient use of our officers.
What about the auxiliary cop program? Is that being amplified? Are you planning to expand that?
It's been not only amplified, but under my supervision when I was the support services chief, we actually got it up to about 50 working members. We ran the first auxiliary police academy in years, and we make good use of them. We have auxiliary officers posted right now at the Parking Violations Bureau. We have them regularly posted at some of our parks and for special events, and they're a very underused resource, and I'd like to use them as often as we can.
Okay, so you spoke earlier about the spillover of crime coming up from the Bronx, because I think, in my humble opinion, I think that there is a perception of criminal element coming from the Bronx, that YPD will not respond as quickly as NYPD, which is incorrect, because it's already been proven that YPD in many instances has been actually faster. Statistically, do you see a percentage of crimes now coming from Bronx residents as opposed to Yonkers residents?
Absolutely, and we recently, if you were following the news, we had a recent smash and grab type robbery in the height of rush hour, in the height of the city, in the center of the city, and all 4 suspects were identified and apprehended, and they were all from New York City who came up to commit this crime with the idea that they were going to get away with it, and they were met with a lot of resistance.
That's the understatement. I'm laughing because I was stunned at the speed of apprehending these guys. That smash and grab happened, I think, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and YPD had the perps within, was it a half an hour? It appeared as though they were heading back to the Bronx over by the Sawmill, and YPD nailed them within under an hour.
Absolutely. Well, we had 3 out of 4 within the first hour, and it took us a little longer on the 4th, but they were all apprehended.
Okay. Now speaking of the ability of Yonkers, of YPD, I read recently that Yonkers police assisted in the arrest of MS-13 gang members and also the Bloods and the Crips. Now, I don't know that you have that element in Yonkers. I believe there is an element of Bloods and Crips, but how dedicated is YPD to eradicating gangs in Yonkers, particularly over in the Nodine Hill area?
We're absolutely committed to it, and we make major arrests of gangs every single day. And we do that with our partners, with the task force. The arrest that you mentioned was one of our task force members was out with the U.S. Marshals, and he was, in fact, an MS-13 member. We have numerous not only blood activity, but we have other gangs that are offshoots of the Bloods. We recently made multiple arrests for the Hounds gang, and the Hounds gang is one of these, blood offshoot gangs, and we made numerous arrests, several arrests in relation to a gang assault that occurred, a very serious gang assault that happened here. And it was a long investigation, and we conducted a thorough investigation, and all those actors are under arrest.
Okay, so in other words, you have there have always been gangs in the YO, if I may call it the YO.
Yes.
And so what you're saying, I believe, is that you have a dedicated element within YPD to police gangs in the Yonkers.
Yes, we have a gangs unit, we have a narcotics unit, we have a pattern crimes unit, and all are dedicated to this gang activity, which we employ a lot of strategies to make these arrests. We use our partnerships, we use technology, we use precision policing models, where we focus on the gangs and on the hot spots.
How many cops are there in the city of Yonkers total?
There's roughly 610, which that number could fluctuate from time to time.
What was the high number you've ever had?
I believe probably about 640, 650 is.
And how many of those cops are detectives?
That offhand, I don't know. I would say probably a small percentage.
But
there's dedicated detective specialists, and there's actual detectives that are in the major case squad. So there's different assignments as well.
Do you find, Ardina, I'm sorry to take up questions from you.
No, go ahead.
Now, I know you have a joint task force of some sort with the NYPD. What about with Mount Vernon? Because Mount Vernon seems to have many of the same issues as Yonkers. So how do you deal with the spillover going both ways with Mount Vernon?
We deal with that as well, but from a strategic standpoint, it's more difficult to deal with people that are using the parkways as an egress. In Mount Vernon, they're basically just going next door. Mount Vernon are our neighbors, so it's easy for us to basically get over there quickly and make apprehension.
Are you finding an uptick in crime from people coming from Mount Vernon, or no?
Not necessarily. In my experience, it's been mostly New York City, but we get people from everywhere. I could tell you that we don't see as many Yonkers residents committing the crime. We see out-of-towners.
It's interesting. When I covered cops, I remember that the Mount Vernon Police Department and the NYPD had so many joint activity things where they would do arrests simultaneously on each side of the border by the subway line. And I don't know if you guys have the same amount as or if it's changed over the past number of years. Do you know if they're as busy or busier than you are with New York City crime, or that's not something you talk about with each commissioner?
I think Yonkers is the center of the world, so it seems like everybody kind of comes here to commit crime. That said, I'm sure Mount Vernon has their share of problems as well.
By the way, Ardina commits no crimes. She lives in Yonkers.
I observe.
I've been her friends for 38 years. Anyway, we're going to go ahead, Charlie.
Well, we're going to come back right after this break. We're going to talk a little bit more with Yonkers Police Commissioner Christopher Sapienza. I'm Charlie Stern. My co-hosts are Peter Moses and Ardina Seward. We'll be back right after the break, and we're going to have our final quarter hour. We're going to wrap up on
1460 WVOX.
Now back to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, Ardina Seward, and Charles Stern on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio. This is Charlie Stern, and my co-hosts are Peter Moses and Ardina Seward, and our guest is Yonkers Police Commissioner Christopher Sapienza. Commissioner, yesterday, on Saturday at noon in New York City, a random guy who works for Goldman Sachs was unfortunately murdered in New York City. Last week, barely a week ago, 10 people were murdered in New York's second largest city, which is Buffalo. Yonkers is the third largest city, so you have to have a plan. You have to have some idea of what would happen if, God forbid, that kind of tragedy came to Yonkers. How do you prepare for something like that?
Well, we prepare for the worst at all times. We prepare for school shootings. We prepare for mutual aid. We make sure we understand which targets might be vulnerable. We work on...
Can you explain what mutual aid is? Not everybody knows.
So the mutual aid system, basically, in layman's terms, every jurisdiction helps one another when they need it.
Okay.
So if a smaller jurisdiction needs more resources and more manpower, they could turn to a system that's in place where 2 or 3 jurisdictions will immediately jump in and help them.
Got it.
So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And we have some resources based on federal resources to deal with these emergencies that small jurisdictions may not have, that we might be able to lend services and equipment to. Our emergency service unit has shared equipment within the county. For instance, our Lenco truck or basically our armored personnel carrier that could rescue people if they're pinned down by gunfire. It could take people from a dangerous area and move them to somewhere safe. Yeah, equipment of that nature.
What other kinds of resources are available, and do you have a communications plan? Like, how would that work? If you're responsible for a big city, there's going to be television cameras, there's going to be all kinds of craziness going on in that situation. How does one prepare for it on the scale of a Yonkers?
Sure. Well, you prepare by actually doing these drills and working with the other agencies. Sometimes we have large-scale drills with numerous agencies simultaneously, and we score everything from response time to our communications, and to deal with whatever situation we might have to face. Most recently, we called for mutual aid when we were overwhelmed with the number of protests following George Floyd. So those type of situations take a lot of resources, and that's what this helps us to do without maintaining that top amount of manning indefinitely, where it costs the taxpayers too much money.
Okay, Charles, I'd like to jump in there for a second. I'd like to go from the big picture to the somewhat smaller picture, if you will. Commissioner, when you go downtown in downtown Yonkers, you always hear people complaining about quality of life. Drugs, panhandlers, loitering, loud music, and now that we have May 30th approaching, as well as the 4th of July, the fireworks are going to be back. So, well, hopefully they won't, but there's always a specter of fireworks coming. So what are the plans for that? And also just sort of cleaning up Getty Square.
Okay, well, I'll take fireworks first. That's a kind of a complicated area. You throw Getty Square on top of the fireworks. That's a lot there.
I know. Forgive me for lumping everything together. We have 10 minutes left in the show, and I figured I got to get these questions out now.
Fair enough. So the fireworks, listen, we have a detailed plan in place to deal with fireworks. Our detectives and our plainclothes officers focus on sales, focus on large quantities. We focus on public awareness. And we actively go out and try to get these fireworks and dangerous items off the street before the 4th of July.
Well, that's a comfort, because they drove everybody crazy for the last couple of years. So, I mean, it was like Beirut in certain parts of Yonkers. So, I mean, it's good to know that there's going to be, some resources dedicated to that. Now, quality of life, I mean, I know, we're going to have panhandlers and loitering and loud music in every urban city in the United States. It's just, I guess it's sort of something that we have to live with. But we have to live with it to a degree. Is there anything that can be done about that?
Well, yes, and again, not to point the finger at legislation, but things have drastically changed over the few years. Panhandling is not illegal anymore. It used to be. It used to be considered loitering, and there was an actual criminal charge. But now that doesn't exist anymore. And again, we can't keep somebody overnight for loitering or for these minor charges anymore. So as fast as we arrest them, they're back on the street again. So it does prove to be very difficult to try to keep people off the street committing these quality of life.
Does that include aggressive panhandling?
Well, again,
Yeah.
you're allowed to panhandle. What you're not allowed to do is block a city street. What you're not allowed to do is have an encumbrance on a city street or sidewalk. What you're not allowed to do is accost people. So there is a fine line, and there are some things we could do. But we try to take a proactive approach. And when you talk about the homeless and the other quality of life issues involved there, we have services. We have Project Connect, where we try to actually engage people early and say, hey, listen, let's get you some help. Let's get you off the street before there's an issue and before you have to ask for money on the streets.
Speaking of homeless, you're probably aware that there is a proposal to build a 160-bed men's homeless shelter at the border of the Bronx and South Yonkers. The proposal is that they're supposed to start construction, I believe, in 2022, 2023 at 261st Street, which borders Carroll Avenue. And there's a big community uproar about this. Number one, it allegedly will take the property values down, but also you're going to have possibly an element that's going to filter over from the Bronx into that southern tier of Yonkers.
Yeah.
So have you taken a position on that?
Oh, we've always had issues with New York City kind of transferring their problems to Westchester. In the past, we had actually instances where vouchers were being handed out to come to Westchester and leave New York City. We, in turn, would have to inherit certain problems. So, listen, it's always going to be an issue having a homeless shelter in such close proximity to us, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's going to provide shelter and get people off the streets. We'll take one problem at a time. If there is a problem with people spilling out on the streets or moving away from the shelter to commit crimes or other quality of life issues, then we'll deal with that.
Okay, well, my final question, which is one of my favorites and one of my favorite parts of YPD, is the PAL program, which really is a fantastic program, not only in YPD, but through police departments across the country. Is there anything being done to bolster that program?
We're always looking to increase that program. You know, we're of the belief that when you have the most impact when you get kids when they're young. We want to really get out there, show them that, you know, the police are their friends, police are their partners, and the earlier they know that, the better. Recently we did we have Cops and Kids program where we visit schools and just talk to kids at a very young age. And, you know, the great thing about the PAL is that we develop these mentorships where we have some of our former PAL kids actually become police officers, and you know that's the goal for us.
Well, PAL is it's an underserved program. It's a wonderful resource for the community, for the kids, and it fosters a positive relationship between young people and police departments across the country. And frankly, there needs to be more done to highlight PAL.
I want to throw something out there. Commissioner, I think you've been very upfront with us for the most part. I think that you're new to being the commissioner, and there are things that you might be more comfortable saying more about in future months and years. I hope that you have a long stewardship in Yonkers, but I would like the opportunity to come back to you in a few months and see how these initiatives are going and see what new things are on the horizon with the Yonkers Police Department. Do you agree to do something like that?
Absolutely. I welcome the opportunity.
I thought you did a good job. I was pretty pleased, very pleased with you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you coming on here.
So you're going to have to find out next week. You're going to have to find out next week who our guest is, because we don't have time to tell you. This is Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses with Charlie Stern and Ardina Seward. We'll be back next Monday, 3 o'clock, with the lawnmowers. Bye now.